So we're going to look at history and A&E. They're two A&E networks,
Yeah,
brands, and different story here. Very so fascinating to compare them.
it really is. And again, it's one of the fun things about what we do, right? You get a little bit nerdy with the numbers, but as my former mentor and SVP Chuck Gingold said to me back in the day, numbers are just people underneath, right? With stories when we
Yeah,
talk about ratings. Well, these numbers aren't people per se, but they are programs, and behind a program is a producer, and that is a
yeah.
real live human being, with an idea and a dream and a story to tell.
Yeah,
So these numbers represent
plus the
something.
associate producer and the interns that are trying to get a job, and there's a whole each number here is a whole community, and it's often a town's economy. If you're talking, say, wildlife, it makes such a
Yeah.
difference at a city like Bristol. Anyway, let's go back to history and
Yeah.
A&E.
Well, it's a tale of two cities a little bit here. Now, these are sister networks, as we all know, within the same organization, but
Yep.
they are managed separately editorially. History tells a story that's a little similar to National Geographic in terms of the trend number, right? We don't really see a major drop off. Over the course of 4 years, it went from about 400 hours to 350 hours. So, statistically speaking, you're talking about what? It's still about a 10, 12% drop, but it's a lot more measured as it goes. You don't see that dramatic fall like you saw with Discovery. Again, we don't see the starting point as high as we did with Discovery, right? Discovery was at 600 plus. History was sitting here at 400 at the beginning of the time frame that we track. So, but what you've got with history is you've got a lot of long running series, very long running series, things like The Curse of Oak Island, that is just, what is it, like 25 episodes a season or something like that. One day they'll find something on the island and the whole freaking series is going to have to go off the air. Um, but they do a great job of returning these brands over and over, and it gives them a sort of a consistency, which is not, you don't find it as often as you used to, but it is one of the things they do. That being said, they still do quite a bit of what we call new. And with the new, what we mean by that is new series. And let me see if I can get you the number real quick. They had in 2025, of the series, they did about 31 series. About a third of those were what I call new. And by new, I mean first seasons, not new producers, but new brands. A first season is an opportunity for somebody, right? It's
But
not.
Were they spin-offs like, I don't know, I'm
uh
making
I'd
something
have to
up.
go back.
Instead of doing Porn Stars Las Vegas, they do Porn Stars Reno.
Yeah, I don't recall a lot of that. They did do, I think, a variation on Curse of Oak Island with Tales of Oak Island. But and Proof is out there. They've also done some variations on a bit, like a little short form six part series. But no, the actually a lot of their new stuff kind of follows a trend that they've had where it's like some sort of history in the label with, and then name a celebrity kind of thing. So they have sort of hazardous history with Henry Winkler, right? The Fonz, if
Oh.
you're old enough. They've got, Mysteries Unearthed with Danny Trejo. So they've got very classic history-based topics, but they're fronting them with names and faces that you recognize, and that gets them the ability to maybe get noticed in the marketplace. So in that sense, you are seeing a sort of commonality across a lot of these brands. Lawrence Fishburne is still riding high, I think, on this fourth season of History's Mysteries. So it's a formula that's worked very well for them, for sure. Um,
But looking at A&E, Dan,
A&E is a
A&E
different
is
story.
actually it's
Yeah, you
higher
saw
in
growth.
2025 than 2022.
Yeah,
It
pretty impressive actually that we saw the growth coming in there. They jumped from about a little over 300 hours to 400 hours in 2024, and the thing that's been driving that largely is the crime genre, right? And when I say crime, it could be a lot of things. You've got court cam, and you've got oh gosh, First 48, of course, is their mainstay. But A&E is loaded with crime and justice programming of all sorts of interesting formats, and it's been obviously a major deliverer. And then the other one they've got is a fairly probably low-cost archive-based stuff in the wars category, road wars, customer wars, neighborhood wars, where they use a lot of kind of user-generated archive crafted together to tell half-hour stories. And they've done quite a bit of that as well. They had a pretty big increase in their unscripted category, which includes that genre. In 2025, though, we did finally start to see a bit of the economic reality kind of come into play here. And they pulled back a little bit. And in fact, they kind of pulled back maybe to 2023 levels. They're about 350 hours now, which is comparable to what we saw with not National Geographic, with History Channel right next door. So they are pulling back a little bit. The unknown, I think, Peter, you and I have talked about in our previous webinar on History Channel specifically, is they put there was an announcement that History A&E Networks was going up on the market for sale. We haven't actually heard anything since, so we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But you do wonder when you are out there in the marketplace talking about yourself, if you do start to kind of button up some of your spending levels to make yourself more attractive in those discussions. So that might explain a little bit of the dip as well. The other trend,
I'm just going to add to that, the mergers and acquisitions, the M&A environment right now is making untold impacts on programming decisions, and we could spend a whole webinar just on that, Dan.
Very much.
A&E was not on the market and was therefore, steady over the last few years, and is suddenly being entertaining buyers. Whereas Discovery, they experienced the merger or the acquisition with consolidation with Warner Brothers, and are now back on the market all over again with Paramount.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we leave those impacts? We'll leave those impacts for another day.
Yeah, and I will say that it's noted that at number one, as we record this, I know it won't be the day we release, but as we record, I believe today is the day that all the bids need to be in for Warner, at least for a first bid, right? The other thing, though, to make note of, and we did talk about this a bit in our history webinar as it relates to A&E Networks specifically, is they don't have the natural built-in streamer. And if you recall, 4 years ago, we talked about that possibly as a liability. Then we shifted it maybe to an asset as streamers became a little bit more economically challenged. And now we're kind of mixed, right? At least with Discovery and Nat Geo as the prior two brands, they kind of have a streaming outlet to work with their economics, and they can kind of play in both areas. A&E doesn't have that luxury, so they have to find other ways to make these things work. They're doing that clearly with, I think, slight cuts. Probably they're looking to, we saw with the Life After People series on History, they used extensive AI to reboot that brand, which probably brought the cost down without taking away from the story. And in both cases, but particularly I think with History, I'm starting to see a trickling in of acquisitions. Not many, not enough to go crazy on, but you are seeing a couple of acquisitions, Mysteries Above being probably the most prominent on History. And acquisitions are good because you get the volume of hours without the cost involved with it. And we'll see if that's just kind of like they're exploring the market for the occasional, or much like Nat Geo, where it became a real pivot in their buying strategy.
Yeah, I did a study for a leading network on acquisitions, and one of the challenges, of course, is that in the interest of cost saving, nearly all the networks started looking closely at acquisitions around about the same time, which meant that it was competitive to get the good stuff, and there isn't as much as you'd think. And a lot of it requires reversioning to fit the brand. So, but Dan, this is really fascinating. Let's move on.